We've been talking about how the Bible is like a library with two buildings, an older building and a newer building. And we have been walking through the aisles of the older building, the Old Testament. We began in the history section, and there were 17 books in the history section. Last time, we gained some wisdom, and we looked at the books of wisdom, the 5 books in the middle of the Old Testament. Today, we enter the last section of this old building, the Old Testament. The aisles that we will walk through today are the books of prophecy. There are 17 books in this section that go from Isaiah to Malachi. This section is often broken down into 2 more sections, the major and the minor prophets. While we take a brief look at this section, we need to keep in mind that just because they appear at the end of the Old Testament, many of these books of prophecy happened during the times that the books of history tell us about. The Old Testament was not gathered in order, but rather by these thoughts of history, wisdom, and now prophecy. Before we look at this section, I want to make sure that you understand some of the words that we are using. A prophecy is a message given by God through a person, a prophet, to people. A prophet is someone who heard and understood and shared a message from God. These prophecies were for people at the time that they were shared, and some were for events that would happen for everyone far into the future. Let me introduce you to some of these prophets. First, there is Daniel. You may remember some of the famous stories about Daniel, like the time he was thrown into a lion's den. Many people think that's the only thing Daniel did to show others that he believed in and trusted God. But that's not true. Did you know that God also used Daniel as a prophet? He gave Daniel many different messages to tell the people. In one, God revealed a message to the ungodly king Belteshazzar in a strange way. See, King Belteshazzar was having this party, and they were really partying. Then all of a sudden, the people at the party saw a hand writing on the wall. No body, no anything, just a hand. Daniel was called to the scene, and God gave Daniel the words of the message to share with the king. And there were many other prophecies that God gave Daniel about things that still haven't happened. Even though it may be hard to think about, but the things that Daniel wrote thousands of years ago will still come true. And these weren't his words. They were God's words. Daniel just wrote them down for God. And because God keeps his promises, you can know for sure that the prophecies Daniel wrote about the future will come true. Next is Ezekiel. Ezekiel was supposed to work as a priest, but God had another job for him. God gave him many messages to tell his people who had been captured and taken away from their homes. God's messages to Ezekiel were very different. God often had him do some pretty unusual things to share his messages to his people. One time, Ezekiel had to build a small model of the city of Jerusalem. Another time, he had to cut part of his hair and throw it up into the wind. And then there was the time that he had to bake bread on poop. Yeah, some of those things were pretty weird and gross. But near the end of Ezekiel, he got to share some pretty cool prophecies about heaven. Guys, it's going to be so beautiful there. Every time God asked Ezekiel to do something, he always obeyed. And God used these unusual examples to show his people how they had sinned against him, a holy and righteous God. Ezekiel began to understand just how much God hates sin, and I hope that those who read and study Ezekiel understand that too. Meet Jeremiah. One of his nicknames is the weeping prophet. Weeping means crying. See, God called Jeremiah before he was even born to be his prophet, but it was not easy. God wanted Jeremiah to tell his people, the Israelites, that they had not obeyed. God gave them so many opportunities to turn from their sin, But they didn't. They kept on sinning and disobeying what he commanded them to do. Jeremiah's message to the people was that God was going to punish Israel for their sin. There was going to be another country who would come in and take over the people. This message came true when Israel's enemy, Babylon, defeated Israel. Many of the people were taken from their homes and forced to move far away. Even though God's people deserved to be punished, he still loved them. In fact, he told Jeremiah to tell them that he had good plans for them. If they began to seek him with all their hearts, then God would bring them back. God never gave up on his people, and he will never give up on us either. We can trust God because he has a plan and a future for all of us, as long as we seek him with all of our heart. Some of the prophecies were for the people at that time to take action. Other prophecies were for events to come in the future, like the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And some prophecies have not yet come to pass, like when Jesus returns. All prophecies help us to learn more about God and how he cares for us, and how we need to follow his word. A prophecy is not a prediction. A prediction can be wrong. It's a guess, or what someone thinks may happen. A prophecy comes from God and is true. What are some things that we can learn by reading and studying the books of prophecy?